So welcome. BetaBagels normally takes place right down there over by the Brooklyn Bridge in the Manhattan Borough President's office. We miss being in the office very much, and we love this city, and we're glad that you're here to join us. Probably there's a lot of people here today that are new to this event, and maybe are coming from different cities. So we're excited to have you. Let us know in the chat who you are, where you're coming from, and what your favorite bagel is. I have a everything bagel, not whole wheat. I like whole wheat everything. I also like egg bagels. One thing we like to do at the beginning of our events, especially if they're in a physical place, is recognize the land that we're standing on. So New York City has a tremendous history, and particularly in the area where we're based in the Manhattan Borough President's office, the history of the Dutch colonizing the natives is pretty, it's a very interesting history, and we like to recognize that there were other people that came here before us, and looking into the future as we are transforming our city and our place, and doing things that affect people, we want to ensure that what we do is beneficial to everybody, and that we are stewards for the future, and we're not taking the same paths that others have taken in the past. So recognition to the Lakota people who came here before us. Thank you. BetaBagels is an experimental breakfast salon for changemakers and doers. It started a few years ago. Beta NYC started it to bring people together who are interested in government, technology, data, design, and bringing better services to the city. So this is our 7th one, and in the past we've had guests who've spoken about civic service design that's taking place in the city, the new algorithms management position that's I forget the name, AMPO is the acronym, but we've had many people come and talk about how they're using data or technology in the city to improve the experience for the people who live here. So it's just our way of bringing people together around these interests and sharing as much as we can, and creating a better sort of channel between people and government and what's happening in the city. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Jessica Mates and Daniel Alum, both of whom are from the Manhattan Borough President's Office, Gail Brewer. And we are so glad to have them here just to say a quick hello. Normally they kick off with us in the office with lots of bagels.
Excellent. Thank you, Kate, and thank you. Welcome everyone to the BetaBagels show. We're always very happy to be here. The slides of Noel in the office made me a little sad because, you know, being in the conference room is something I miss. I go into the office a lot, and it's just very lonely there with me and a couple people. So, but I always like introducing BetaBagels at our events and introducing Beta NYC at our events, because they have been working with us for a long time in our office. And when they started working with us, I had absolutely, literally no idea what they did. So I knew that they, technology something, data something, good work, no idea. And my understanding and appreciation for Beta NYC grew in a very selfish way, because I started to recognize that the work they were doing could not only help the work that we were doing at the Borough President's Office, but could actually help us do better and more work that was more relevant and needed in the city. So just very quickly how that grew. I mean, they started doing things like a, very basic, they did a, demographic analysis of our community boards, compared it to the demographics of the communities that the community board served, so we could understand the differences in how we needed to target our recruitment better. Pretty basic. Then they started developing tools. So, we have board stat, which, let community boards be able to manipulate 311 data such that they could use it to inform their decision-making for their communities. Then other tools came on board, SLAM, so we could look at, decide about liquor licenses in a more comprehensive way, instead of just sort of the random way it had been happening. Series of different tools. There are boundary maps where you could compare boundaries of different types of, districts, council districts, community board districts, school districts, police precincts. after our variances tools. So a lot of housing tools, things that really helped us, community boards, communities, be able to use data in a way that could really enhance the work. And then the next piece that was really important for our office was data requests, something they call radar, which I can never exactly remember what that acronym stands for, but it has to do with us being able to submit requests for data. And that has been just an amazing piece for us in the office because it informs everything we do. So whether we're working on a ULURP, a land use process, deciding how we're spending our capital money, or developing some really sophisticated and meaningful policy work in our office, we've been able to request data. I give data requests sometimes for things that I have no idea if the data exists or if it, how it can be useful, but the team at Beta NYC works with me and figures out how we can solve a problem or get to, complete a project using the data that they're able to find and present to us. So it's been an amazing experience for our office, definitely for me personally, but really for the whole borough president's office in really, bringing our work to a whole new level. So, I'm very, very happy to, welcome people and kick off these meetings because we've had this wonderful experience with Beta NYC. So I am going to be present for part of this meeting. My colleague Daniel Alam is here. He's our policy analyst that works on technology and a whole lot of other issues. And we look forward to the presentation and to continuing this work that I now understand what it is. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Oops, I have to turn off my Slack notifications. Sorry. If you need me, text me. The radar stands for Research and Data Assistance Request. So yeah, check it out at beta.nyc/radar. And it's open to now not only the MBPO, but other offices and community organizations. And my team who's here today, Emily Goldman helps run that, he and Inez James and Gabby Langston, who are both apprentices who graduated from our Civic Innovation Fellows program. They all work on those requests and are the power behind it all. So say hi to them if you see them in the chat or in the networking session. So next, Beta NYC, and I'm going to hand it over to Inej.
Hi, everybody. My name is Inez James. I'm a Civic Innovation Apprentice at Beta NYC. Now, for those of you who don't know, Beta NYC is a civic organization. Our goal is to improve digital inclusion and literacy in New York City through civic engagement, open data, technology, and design. We have a civic innovation program, which we have a fellowship program. So our Civic Innovation Fellowship exposes CUNY students to employment as a public servant, and we equip them with digital era analytical skills and give them an inside view of government. Our human-centered research provides in-depth assessments of local needs. We build digital tools and promote agile processes that make it easier for government workers to do their jobs. And our trainings, public events, and programs provide critical space for demystifying civic infrastructure and digital expertise. And that directly supports the emerging needs of digital civic society. So that's what we do. We have the Civic Talent and Career Pipeline, the Civic Innovation Lab, as well as public engagement. So we strive to connect, learn, innovate, as well as collaborate. Next slide. Yes, okay, great. We'd also want to say a special thank you to the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, and as well as the our LA friends at datadonuts.la. Okay, I will hand it back over to Kate to introduce our speaker.
Thanks, Inej. Yeah, thank you to our supporters. We couldn't do it without you. And Data and Donuts is how I think Noel was originally inspired to start up BetaBagels. It's kind of like the East Coast version of it. So I hope everyone's enjoying a bagel right now. Like I said, I have my I haven't eaten it yet because I don't need the seeds in my teeth for the event. But let us know what your favorite bagel spots are. I have my favorites. So without further ado, why you're all here, to hear from Katherine Benjamin from the CTO's office in New York City. The Mayor's Office of the Chief Technology Officer is here to ensure that technology is inclusive, accessible, human-centered, and works for all New Yorkers. So they're helping the city adopt new processes and technologies to make New York City fairer and great in all that it does. And I was really excited to meet Katherine because she comes from, she has a lot of experience in the public sector and in digital transformation, and her work with the NHS UK and with Ontario Digital Services is really interesting in terms of bringing more agile and open processes to cities and to institutions that typically don't have these processes. So I'm excited that she's here in New York City and is bringing that power to New York and showing people how things can be done. Something that she just launched this, she'll tell you about it, but she just came on board during the pandemic, I think in March, if I'm not mistaken, but she helped start the fellowship program that the CTO's office is now running, and she's going to tell us all about that. And without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand it over to Katherine.
Awesome. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for that really warm introduction. Very excited to be with you today. So thank you so much for having me here today. I'm going to keep a tight eye on the clock, so I should be finished up around 9:45, 9:50, so we have time for questions. So today I'm going to be speaking a little bit about digital government and then also about what our office does. So I'm going to give a quick introduction to myself and provide some background because I get asked about this all the time. Then I'm going to give an overview of the global digital government movements. Then I'll talk about our office. I'll give a specific example of a project that we worked on. As Kate mentioned, I will speak about the NYCX Innovation Fellows, and then afterwards we'll have time for Q&A. As I mentioned, I'm not looking at the Slido or anything just now, so sorry if I'm ignoring your questions. So jumping in to a brief introduction for myself. Hello, Katherine Benjamin here. My pronouns are she and her. I wanted to provide a little bit of information on my background because this seems to be one of the #1 questions I get when people meet me. And as Kate alluded to, I'm new to the city of New York. Well, it feels new. It's not so new anymore. I started on March 16th, just as COVID was kicking in. And I come to digital government by way of a lot of different things. So some people come to digital government because, you know, tech has been their lifelong passion. For me, I came to it by way, firstly, of volunteering. So I've been someone who's an active volunteer for most of my adult life. And through that, of course, I'm sure many of you volunteer, you start to see opportunities to make things better. Government by way of volunteerism, and also government by way of sort of frontline work and support around case management. So I had done stuff like working at the Developmental Disabilities Association, working with people with Down syndrome or people who have autism, or doing things like working at Homerton University Hospital in the NHS, where I had a frontline role, working as a case manager or case management worker, doing outreach in the community. So being employed at a hospital, but spending all of my time with a backpack on the road, talking to people who might be experiencing homelessness or have other complex needs, and helping to bring those people into services if that's something they're interested in doing. And I call out that background specifically because when we talk about designing good digital government services and things that feel inclusive, I think it's incredibly important to have an understanding of who are the types of people who would use your services and what are those diversity of needs and diversity of experiences that inform the way those products need to be designed in order to resonate with the intended user. At that point, I sort of switched over from doing frontline stuff, which didn't have any particular technology angle, to moving really directly into a technology role when I moved to NHS England. So you might be familiar with the National Health Service. The NHS is one of the world's biggest health systems, and NHS England is the central commissioning body that helps to commission those services for the 54 million odd people in Britain, in England. So what we were doing there was, or the question was, how do we design digital services that help support some of the public health agenda items that the NHS is trying to do? And so that's when I started looking more intimately at how digital products should be designed to support healthcare projects. And so we worked on the NHS.UK platform, was our primary digital channel. And I wanted to mention that briefly because this audience of people, if you're not familiar with the work of the NHS.UK platform, you might not know about how it has some very cool features. One of those cool features is things like it's more than 80,000 pages of clinically assured content that you can access by API. Most of their tools and widgets you can access through their API. The performance data on individual clinicians, on individual hospitals, all of those things are available. So it's a healthcare system that's very interested in making information available to people. And what you saw and what's sort of interesting about that model is when you make that available, you have this sort of ecosystem that comes around the side of that. And so there's more than 500 syndication partners of that NHS content, including a ton of New York organizations, healthcare related organizations, companies use that content. I won't name drop them, but a lot of them just say that they use that content. So it's a really interesting model to see how that intention behind what the NHS was trying to do manifested in sort of the data community related to healthcare. So that's all I'll say about that, but I just wanted to throw that in. And then I've also done some work consulting, and I most recently was at a digital healthcare startup. So all of these things I mentioned because it helps provide a context on how I view digital services and sort of the way I like to think and talk about digital services. But I'll get to that in a second, because first I'm going to give a really quick overview of the global digital government movement. And I said it singular there, and what I should be saying is digital government movements, plural, because there isn't just sort of one way to do it. And of course, different people are doing different things. And a movement is, you know, a lot of people moving. They're not necessarily all working in a you know, one coordinated manner, but we're all sort of moving in the same general direction. So if you look around the globe, you'll see that there's a number of governments doing these sort of digital transformation things and coming into the internet era and trying to make services better. And when you look at the characteristics, oh, hold on, slides aren't moving. There we go. If you look at the characteristics of those movements, they have a lot of common themes. So this is my second logo soup slide. And so these are some of the logos and icons of some of the players in the digital government space. By no means is this an inclusive list. It would be like just a whole slide of nothing but logos. There's tons going on in this space. But you look to organizations like in the US, you have 18F and the US Digital Service. In Europe, you have organizations like what's happening in Germany and Estonia. You have New Zealand, Australia, Canada. I didn't put the Wales slide up. I forgot to do that. They're all doing that group there all sort of marches in the same direction. Portugal has the LabX program, Italy, Singapore, Taiwan, UAE. I mean, these are all different jurisdictions who are sort of going their own way, but they share these common characteristics. So one is that they are user-centered in how they approach the design and build of products. The second thing is that they're doing agile ways of working. And historically, that's not how governments have built their technology. The third thing is that product management culture and transitioning towards things like having a product manager and having product owners and moving towards that way of working. And finally, that defaulting to open culture. So I mentioned I gave the NHS.UK example, but you know, another example is if you go on YouTube, you can just watch random show and tells from, for instance, the government digital service in the UK. It's not like a ribbon cutting show and tell or like a big product launch. I mean, those are kind of there, but they also just have like, you know, kind of not very interesting show and tells of just like work in progress. And there's nothing huge to announce. It's just, this is how they're being transparent and open with their way of working. And so you see those things, or people doing week notes. And so those are sort of characteristics you see amongst all the digital governance movements. The one thing I'll add here is the One Gov global movement, which is a not jurisdictionally bound movement of digital government nerds. There wasn't a conference this year for obvious reasons, but that's just random public servants from across the globe meeting up to talk about digital government. It's like a self-funded thing if you want to go. So that's one worth watching if you're like super into learning about all the different countries and what they're doing. And that's actually how I made this slide, was I went into that Slack group and just like randomly looked at the last comments, and whatever organization they were, they got a logo on this slide. All right. So when I'm thinking about digital government stuff, or when I'm talking to anyone about digital government stuff, I also like to briefly contextualize sort of the ecosystem of one of the ways to think about this. And so at the broadest sense, when we're talking about government services, we have this sort of system level or policy level stuff. And that might be something like, I've just made this up, benefits, programs, and taxes. And then within that, you kind of have, within the system, you have services. And so that's things like program design. So for instance, an emergency response benefit of some sort. And then within that, that's where you see the digital product or the touch point, the technology solution. In this case, it could be an application form. And I specifically mention this because when you're working in digital government, or when you're looking at some of the things that are happening in the space, or if you're interested in joining, one of the tensions you'll find is often there's tremendous pressure on the digital product, the app, the website, application form, to address some of these service or system level things. And that is, of course, very challenging because technology can't do all of those things. But one of the exciting things that's happening is when we talk about things like defaulting to open or digital era ways of working, is that we're starting to see the way product management culture or a user-focused design or service design focus is starting to permeate the culture of how we think about these things. And so you start to see some really excellent examples, for instance, what you see coming out of the Ontario Digital Service about the way in which the digital service standard has been enshrined in legislation, and that actually comes through at a policy level, even though it really had its roots within the product level. So that might have been really esoteric. I wanted to cover that because some people really like that background, so I've just thrown it in there for you, but I'm going to move on to some more tangible things in a second. But the final thing I'll leave you on, speaking about sort of product, system, service, and culture, is that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And we say that because if you're following what's happening in digital government, you know that the rally cry is that the strategy is delivery. And so all this is what people mean when they say that. And of course, there's books written about this topic, is that it's really easy to sit around and talk about what could be and imagine all of the things that have to happen in a future world. And that is important. One has to be forward looking, but equally, one actually has to start doing something. And in many cases, especially with technology, unless you're talking to an inside group of people who are really deep into technology, if you talk at an abstract level and you can't show something tangible, it's difficult to take people on the journey because they're not necessarily imagining the same thing you're imagining, or they might not understand how technology works. So it's difficult to get people corralled behind a concept or an idea if things aren't being shown. So the digital government movement often says the strategy is delivery, and sort of one of the three things that you'll see in these jurisdictions who are committed to this is this culture of just start, the idea that value can't be created until the work is put into the hands of users, so try to get to that MVP as soon as possible. The second thing is that you really want a minimum viable everything. So it's extremely tempting, especially in government where you're dealing with really, really, really complex broad-reaching things, to want to put every single bell and whistle into everything always. But of course, we don't want to boil the ocean. So start with your MVPs and work in a sort of a hypothesis-driven way to try to build out from there. And of course, learn and iterate. And we can't learn and iterate if there's nothing that someone can respond to. The value of getting something into the hands of users early and often, so that you can learn and iterate and have a user-centered design process kicking off and informing the design of that product. So my final slide here before I talk about the Office of the CTO is a quote that I love from Susanna Fox, which is that technology is a Trojan horse for change. So when people say technology, they often mean innovation. When they say interoperability and open data, what they're talking about is a culture change. So I wanted to sort of give an overview of some of the culture change things and some of the characteristics you might be seeing in some of these digital government arenas, because I think it's a nice little primer for the work that I'll cover in just a moment. So moving over to the Mayor's Office of the CTO, and I'll also check my time. I'm doing well, yes. We are a team of people excited about digital government stuff. So we use innovation to make New York City future ready. We have 4 parts of our office, so sort of 4 portfolios. The first one is universal broadband. So that's about bringing high quality, affordable, and safe internet to all New Yorkers. The second area is my area, the digital services area. So that's about bringing digital services building digital services that make government work for everybody. The third area is the inclusive innovation portfolio. So that's about making New York a place that introduces new ideas that improve people's lives, particularly focusing on that inclusive angle. And then the fourth area is tech policy. So that's looking at things like smart cities or AI, advancing policies that bring about good technology use. So those are the four areas that the Mayor's Office of the CTO focuses on. But of course, as Kate mentioned at the outset of this presentation, things have been a little bit different this year, or last year, I guess we should say. So since I started with the Mayor's Office of the CTO, basically at the same time that the COVID-19 pandemic was kicking off, our office has really been focused on responding to COVID-19 related things. So supporting agency partners and other mayoral offices using technology to try to help respond to the emergent needs that are coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. So the Mayor's Office of the CTO, all of our work is really focused on how we support other partners or mayoral offices. And so, of course, the last year has been particularly challenging because I don't think I have to explain why it's challenging, but from a technology standpoint, I mean, because historically you wouldn't necessarily say something like the majority of people are interacting with their governments through online mediums. I mean, certainly increasingly people were doing that, but you wouldn't say that the majority are. Whereas now what we have because of this remote situation is that, you know, in many cases for many people, the primary interface between the everyday person and their government is now a digital medium. And so that was something that that sort of happened very quickly. So it's kept us very busy. So an example of the type of projects that we've been working on would be the Connected NYC Older Adults program. So one thing I forgot to do, but I will do after this conversation, is I will tweet the link to the blog where I go into a huge amount of detail with my colleague Mayo. I'm about to go into some detail, but if you're interested in knowing the absolute minutia, I believe it's been described as somewhat of a boring blog. It's for a certain type of audience. If you really want to know the details of how we worked on this project, there's a blog on that. So I'll tweet that out after. Or maybe I'll also share it with Kate, would be a good way to get that out to all of you. But the Connected NYCHA Older Adults program was focused on getting 10,000 internet connected tablets to vulnerable and low income older adults. So we worked on this in the spring. And so we worked on this with the Department for the Aging and also with NYCHA. And so part of what we were doing in the digital services team is working to optimize every aspect of that experience. Because if you're thinking about an older adult who's receiving a tablet, we can't assume that they know how to use this tablet or they have any experience using a tablet. Of course, we know that probably many have. You know, it's 2021, lots of people have been exposed to products like tablets. But when you're designing a product like this, of course, we don't want people to be left behind. And so as we approached this, we were working both on the digital services team and also on the, our design lab side to try to consider from a service design perspective, how we could think about all of the touch points that a user is going to go through as they access this tablet, and how we can sort of optimize for that. So what you're seeing on the image there is us kitting one of the devices, or actually our partners at T-Mobile kitting the devices. And so I put this image up to highlight a couple of things. So what we had done was we wanted to create a clean interface to reduce the cognitive load. We didn't want it to be this overwhelming thing. Because if you recall, when you first get a tablet or any device, and it's brand new, you open it, and there's like, you know, instructions, and you have to charge the device, and then you have to turn it on and make sure it's running in English, and you have to, you know, do a whole bunch of stuff. And what we did is we had that kitted up front so that when the user received the device and had their unboxing experience, those devices were charged, those devices had been set up, and what you see on the home screen is the same thing that they would see. And so we had print collateral that went into the box. We were very limited in what we could put in the print collateral. So there was only so many calls to actions or instructions we could provide. And we really didn't want people having tablets, but not being sure how to use it. So a huge amount of effort went into designing and thinking through everything from how the person opts in and consents to receiving a tablet, to how they would experience the unboxing. And if they needed help, you know, part of the reason we wanted it kitted in this way is so that if they call, you know, one of the multilingual people speaking to them can communicate, well, you know, go the third icon in on the right to do X, Y, or Z. And so the sort of telephony support around this project, we wanted it to be as smooth as possible. So this is something that gives an example of how our design lab and the digital services and the mayor's office of the CTO, how that team intersects with some of the work that our digital services team was doing. And I'll show an example of that in just a moment, to try to get these 10,000 tablets out as quickly as possible. And so the project was focusing on areas with low broadband access. And of course, I don't think I have to tell this group that there's often a strong correlation between broadband access, poverty, and those communities that were hardest hit by COVID-19. And so what you're seeing on this screen is an image of a platform that we built just for the internal monitoring of this project as it was rolling out. We had a dashboard that had really fast turnarounds and updates that would tell us how many devices are being kitted, where are they being shipped, how many have been received. And that was something that the digital services team helped to stand up so that we could have really good oversight of where things were going, because as you can imagine, things were moving extremely quickly. My slide doesn't want to change. Oh, yes, it does. We're good. Okay, so the final thing I'll share here, and just for context, this is a quote that we have consent to share, is the user research that we did around the 10,000 tablets project. Because of course, when you're doing any sort of digital project, you want to make sure that you're engaging with the audience that you're trying to connect with, and that you have that feedback loop that we talked about, which is so important in the digital government movement. And so this quote is from someone who received a tablet, and they said, "When I got the tablet, I didn't realize how lonesome I was without visits from my children. It's like a connection to the outside without the fear of catching the virus. The tablet brings you closer to people without physical contact." So this user research, we're really happy that we were able to ensure that happened, even though we were moving quite quickly. And it's really awesome to just sort of hear from the people who are actually using the thing that you're designing for. So in the final section here, because I think I have about 3 to 7 minutes before I want to cut myself off here, is talking about the NYCX Innovation Fellows Program. So Kate mentioned that this is something new out of the Mayor's Office of the CTO, and that is about doing tours of duty in government. So here you can see 2 lovely fellows, Meg in the top right and Divya in the bottom right. And so they're 10-week sprints where people are working 20 hours a week on agile multidisciplinary teams. And this is a project that we work super closely with our partners at the US Digital Response, who are super awesome. If you're not following their work, or at the very least their Twitter, I simply must insist that you check them out. They are such an awesome group of people. So when we talk about multidisciplinary teams, it's probably exactly what you're imagining. So we scope out projects that are about 10 weeks long. We have sort of a good sense of the shape of the problem space we're trying to explore. And then we bring together a bespoke team. So it usually looks something like what I have on the slide here. It changes depending on what exactly the thing is that we're trying to do. Not every team needs all of these things, but product manager, data analyst, user researcher, designer, developer, usually developers, the plural. And so they spend 10 weeks working on a project. So currently we are in cohort 2, which I'll talk about in just a second. But first, I'll give you a sense of the NYCX Innovation Fellows cohort 1 projects. So one thing that we did, this ran from August until October of 2020. So one thing we did was work on a continuous translation pipeline. So this project was with our partners at MOIA, the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs. And this is project codename ELSA, which stands for Easy Localization System Access. Also, it's just a catchy name. And so that was one project in cohort 1. Another project we did in cohort 1 was just supporting some of the broadband work. And so trying to do some work around assets. And there was a third project, which I can't show an image of because of the sensitive nature of the data, but I will describe it for you, which is called the Anti-Bias Dashboard. And so that was with the Mayor's Office for the Prevention of Hate Crimes and Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice. And that project was focused on helping to map and visually represent where incidents of hate crime are occurring in the city, particularly related to COVID-19. Currently, we're in cohort 2 of the NYCX Innovation Fellows. So I can't show you the work in progress, but I can tell you the 3 partners. We're working with DIFTA, the Department for the Aging, SBS, Small Business Services, specifically looking at MWBE businesses, and also with the Department of Finance. So those projects are in flight right now. We're in week, oh, I should know this. We have about 3 weeks left. And then some final thoughts, just really quickly here before I turn it over to the Q&A, and I'll stop sharing my screen and check out the Slido and check out the questions, is just a heads up that we are hiring in our office for 3 new positions. So I will also tweet this out, but if you go to my Twitter, it's probably like 2 tweets down. So Director of Broadband Technology, Director of Data, Director of Digital Inclusion and Partnerships. I spend a lot of time looking at digital government jobs because I'm in this space and looking at what other people are recruiting for. And these are 3 legitimately super awesome jobs. So please check them out or share them with your friends if you're interested. I'll let this slide stay up just for a second in case anyone's trying to capture my email. And then I will stop sharing my screen in just a moment. But otherwise, thank you so much for listening. I hope the overview, particularly around the digital government movements, was interesting. I'd asked some people who attend Beta NYC sessions if they thought the audience would like it, and they said yes. So I do hope that it was something that you were looking to hear about. But looking forward to chatting more with you about this work. All right, Kate, back over to you.
Awesome. That was so great. Thank you so much, Catherine. Okay, so we have questions coming in on this Slido. So let me just get back into sharing my screen.
Would it be helpful if I just start randomly answering some of the questions that I see?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And I'm going to get the questions up so people can see them on the screen.
Okay. So are the fellowships paid, and when does the next one start? So we haven't confirmed the start date for the next one. We will vaguely say spring 2021. We're in the progress of scoping out those projects at the moment. Currently, the NYCX Innovation Fellowships are part-time, so they're 20 hours a week, and they're not paid. We're looking into finding funding options for that. But we have the paid positions that are open right now, 3 of them. So we definitely encourage people who are looking to make a change or try a new role to check out those posts. So that is the first question. I also saw a question that I do want to jump on top of because I loved it. Never do I ever get enough questions about the 18F playbook. I've lost it. I can't remember where it was, but I think somebody asked, are we interested? Oh,
I might have just checked something off by accident. That happens.
I did the same thing. So really briefly on that, partly because at Forward 50, which is one of the world's biggest digital government conferences, it happened in November, I convened a panel on the question of standards, and it was a global panel. So we had a bunch of different people who do stuff like standards. So just really briefly, so if people haven't seen the 18F playbook, which is an amazing piece of work. And just for context, because I can't ever talk about this without referencing all of the digital government movements, there is certainly, a formula of different governments, the UK, Australia, Ontario Digital Service, New Zealand, different folks who set something like a standard. In the case of the 18F, they've made the playbook. So that's an excellent document. And having come from both the UK, where I was a digital service standard assessor, and also Ontario, where I was involved in their digital service standard, and I ran Ontario's first assessments, actually. To the question of would we do something like copying that, I would say that is an unenviable task to stand up something like that. And there has been so much work that's been outstanding. Those teams who build things like the 18F playbooks or manage or maintain the digital service standards are awesome people. And I would not look to try to take on that work. It's a huge undertaking, and the work's basically been done. So it's out there, it's public. There's no first mover advantage in that, which is to say, just copy someone's work, give them credit, and that's maybe the best way to approach it. So 18F, thank you for doing that work, so we don't have to. Okay, so I'll stop there for a second. Should I go to the top of the list here, Kate, the just start and sacrificial prototypes?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Awesome. So the question is, just start and sacrificial prototypes are dangerous or perceived as dangerous when your population is vulnerable. How do you deal with those situations? So I wonder if I could get a bit more detail on the question, but I think how I would approach that is, I think it depends on how you test it. So we wouldn't be necessarily literally launching an online, in a situation like that, you wouldn't be literally putting a public prototype online because it could, take some, if I could see how that would be dangerous. What I mean is build something at least internally for the people working on that project. So policy, people can see it, so people can say, is this the thing we're talking about, or is it not the thing we're talking about? It might just be something that you build in Figma. There isn't any sort of coding on the back end. It's just something to say, when we talk about, I'm trying to make it tangible. If we talked about a tool to help people reserve emergency shelter beds, so it wouldn't be something you'd put on the public facing internet, but something that you're doing and testing and getting people rallied behind. And then of course, the next step on that would be to do user testing with the actual population in question. And in that case, you'd be going about it in a very measured way. And so that would be, making sure that people are consenting and making sure that people understand that it is a prototype. So like any sort of engagement with vulnerable populations, I think that's how I would approach that. But I see that there's been more added to the chat here, so I will just read that.
Yes, so Ankit's talking about like working within agency cultures and how to transform that. I know that has been a common theme and issues we've seen with friends who've worked in government and bringing this culture into the existing culture and how to do that.
Yeah, so I think the final thing I'll add on that, because it sounds like that there's a lot of nuance there, is certainly the move fast and break things is troublesome. So I think part of it also relates to the top-down support that you have for that new way of working. And so have people been briefed about what sort of culture change you're trying to produce? And you do feel like you're repeating yourself constantly. I was told when I worked in the UK, you have to repeat it. And then when you think you can't repeat it anymore, repeat it 20 more times, and then people will start to understand. And so I think partly making sure that people understand the difference between showing something that's just a prototype and showing something that's definitely the thing that we're going to do. I think the thing that we're touching on here, though, is that as soon as you make something tangible, some people are like, whoa, now we're doing an app that looks exactly like this, to which you're saying, no, we're not making an app that's exactly like this. I just made a prototype to give an example of the concept of an app and how the concept of the app works. So that starts to, inherently, as you're building anything, tension will be produced out of that. So I'd say that it's not a super easy thing to do. I don't have a snappy answer to that question, but I know exactly what folks are referring to. Another thing, and it's also part of the reason that I mention the digital government movements all of the time, to the point that I think people are tired of hearing about it, but hopefully this audience wasn't, is because that by talking about how other people have done it, it helps to give context that this isn't something that we've whimsically come up with. This is something that government after government after government after government and tons of companies have done, and they've done it in a very measured and safe way. And so, one has to proceed with like a, thinking critically about the work, but equally, there's sort of a set pattern to how you want to do this culture change, so people don't have to necessarily be frightened of it. It's been done with great success in other jurisdictions. So I don't know if that fully answered the question, but I know I've spent a lot of time on that. So I want to make sure I get to other questions, but feel free to ping me with follow-ups, because that's a really good and nuanced one. Okay, I'll stop there. Kate, maybe you can tell me which question you'd like me to answer next.
Yeah, sure. I tend to go with the ones that are upvoted, but I guess we don't have a ton of upvotes. So Slack groups that you recommend for getting involved in digital services. I think you mentioned some communities at the start, so definitely check out the Logo Soup. I think I have a snapshot, or I can get that Logo Soup shot from you and share it with folks after the event. Do you have any off the top of your head? Otherwise, I'd suggest people share in the chat what their favorite ones are.
Yeah, I would look at the OneGov Global. So, I mean, some of them, like any organic movement or like grassroots organizing, are like sometimes a little bit hard to make sense of online, because people aren't spending like multiple hours a week managing a website or whatever. But OneGov Global is a great one, and I will share my slides. Actually, I don't have a OneGov Global link, but that's the one that I mentioned, where it's just like completely random groups of public servants who of their own volition are like, yes, I would like to attend a 3-day conference that I pay for myself. I mean, the conference is free, but you got to get there to meet other people who are working in this space. And it's like very organic, and it was an unconference. So, you know, it's got a really nice non-corporate vibe to it. So, so I'd say that that is one of my favorite ones. But there are also, I know that the US Digital Response has a very active volunteer Slack channel. I think those are the two ones I hear the most about. Yeah, I'll stop there. Which other questions should I jump in about?
Let's see. We have a question about user research and staying accountable to the people you're creating tools for. Yeah, I guess if you want to answer that, are there challenges to that that are common across the board, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So I love the user research question, and that was actually my bridge from non-digital to digital, was through user research. So very briefly, I was able to get pulled into product teams because I had worked in qualitative research, which isn't the same as user research, but sometimes it's close enough for what's needed. And so if that's a really good question, I think that's something that anyone working in user research spends a lot of time thinking about. I think one of the best things we can always do is to try to set a steady cadence of user research in government. And that seems like a very weird, operational, and boring answer, but just bear with me about why I'm saying that. It is difficult to do user research in government. When I stood up the Ontario Digital Services User Research Lab, we spent a huge amount of time writing things like a business case, which you wouldn't think, a business case to get money to be able to pay people to participate in user research. You wouldn't think that that's the thing that takes the most amount of time. It took a Herculean effort, but Ontario now is able to run with that. They do user research roughly every Thursday. And so you start to see that building up the systems in place that make it easy to do a steady cadence is one of the best things you can do to support user research. And by extension to the question, which now I can't see anymore, but I think it was something to the effect of, and how do you stay accountable to people? So I think trying to make sure that every time you do user research, you're not having to start again from scratch and get new consent forms and find a new way to recruit and all of these things, but actually start to embed that in the culture change. And as soon as that becomes the sort of de facto way of doing things, that makes a huge movement forward. I think the final thing I'll add is that helping people to understand that user research is a team sport. GDS and the Australian Government Digital Service, GDS in the UK, and the Australian government have made all sorts of, and I say this with love, user research propaganda, like all these calls to action, and they say user research is a team sport. And other people like, I'm blanking on his name, from the NHS, have pointed out that every user research team should be doing, or every person involved in a project should be doing 2 hours of user research every 6 weeks. I don't mean the user researchers. I mean like the random policy person affiliated with this project should be doing 2 hours of user research for every 6 weeks. And so I think those things are really important too, and banging that drum. The final thing I'll add is if you look at my email signature, there is a little line at the bottom, which I guarantee almost nobody reads, but it's something that I get a lot of questions about, which is I put the last date of the last time that I did user research or participated in user research. And so that culture of helping me stay transparent, because I can see if it's been more than 6 weeks since I've done user research, and then I can hustle to get myself into a user research session. So I think there's a lot to do around how we operationalize it. And we don't just make sure that it's like the user researcher's job. That's important. They need to be able to do that work. But the bigger thing is it's not the user researcher who has to spend time doing user research. It's also everybody else affiliated with that. And I don't just mean the product team, I mean the people around that product team. That was a really long answer that I hope got to the nature of the question. But I know that we're at time, so I'll stop rambling at you.
It's fine. So I know we might, if you're okay to answer a few more questions, we'll answer a few more, and then we'll take it to the Wonder Me room, which I just shared a link in the chat to, and we can have conversations amongst ourselves about the other questions. And hopefully in the future, we can have more time for more questions. This has been great so far. I'm just going to switch it up a little bit to see if we can talk. People are really interested in the participatory design, user research, sort of process, and that's great to hear. So maybe we can talk about that in the chat. But one question is, how can we use the COVID situation to push forward digital access to government, community feedback, and voting legislation at the local level in New York City? Oh, and it just got to the top without me even doing anything. Cool. So if you want to answer that and just talk about, looking ahead, what are some opportunities to bring this type of work into government and communities?
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, I'd say that a lot of that actually has kind of happened organically. As I mentioned in my, I'm not suggesting that we're done. I'm just saying it's been interesting to watch that I'd say previously, I've been in the space for a while, and some folks, I think, weren't always convinced that digital plays a huge part in things like access to government and getting community feedback and how people participate in voting. Or if they did, they viewed it as a decidedly, millennial or like an age-based interest. Whereas I think one of the things that's happened that's really interesting over the last couple of months is that, and you start to see this in different digital governments, including the mayor's office of the CTO, is hiring. You're seeing that these teams are starting to grow. And so I think there is recognition and sort of the aha moment that I think is happening is that there were some of the early adopters and decision makers who were always interested in technology. And then there was a cohort of what Lisa Welchman, if you read her book, Managing Chaos, Digital Governance by Design, excellent book, also excellent YouTubes, Lisa Welchman, which she would call, someone who's a digital conservative, someone who's, was sort of less interested in digital until, or historically not interested in it. A lot of those folk in the last year are sort of coming around and more interested in how this works. So I think to a certain extent, it's about helping, the people who are having these aha moments to see what the opportunities are, and then also to focus on the meaningful opportunities. Another thing that sort of drew me into digital government and technology, especially when I wasn't on the technology side, was that a lot of the problems are not technology related in nature. So someone's like, this is a technology problem, but once you scrub in, you're like, oh, I think we're actually overthinking the technology aspect here. This is a lot of people processing and just like sensible allocation of a thing in a system. And I mention that specifically because often when people are interested in technology, they think about the biggest, fanciest, most complex application of something. And often it's actually just really simple, seamless, common sense information logistics and doing things like, I talked a little bit about our design lab, but applying a service design mindset and doing things like, has anyone built a blueprint that maps the entire user journey, the lines of visibility of what people can see and what people can't see, the technical infrastructure that supports everything. And that's how you make that sort of simple, seamless, and intuitive user journey. And those things have to, and thinking about those things up front rather than sort of overly focusing on what is the fanciest technology that could solve this problem. So I think, there's an appetite for it, which is great at the moment, and helping to make sure that that appetite is directed towards, the lowest hanging fruit, because a huge amount can be done right there, and not sort of jumping ahead to very complicated. The answer to everything is not blockchain, is how I will summarize that. So happy to chat more about that. Thank you, Brian Murphy. KISS, excellent. Yes.
Well said. I know Noel and Z, you both are checking out the chat, and Emily too, I think. If you have any questions you'd like to put up, feel free to come on and say. One question I thought was just specific and maybe a simple answer, or not so simple, we'll see. Do you have any insight into what NYC has done to minimize the digital divide for students and people in need of technology during the pandemic? Aside from the work you've mentioned, I guess.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of work going on. If you've had an opportunity to look at, we released the Internet Master Plan last year. So that was just before the COVID-19 pandemic. And that really sets out the agenda and the approach for addressing the digital divide. I haven't worked on any DOE projects specifically or our team, but absolutely it's something that we spend, I mean, it's a whole portfolio portion of our office. You know, a big part of that is things like the 10K tablets project, and we get a lot of questions that we answer about how other agencies can replicate that model. And I think also there's the bigger thing of course, the broadband access, and that's a huge area of work that we're working on alongside a bunch of different partners. So there's sort of the things that we've done that are sort of really small and tactical in nature. And then there's these larger interventions that, of course, because they're much bigger, take a little bit longer to bring to life, but those are absolutely in motion. And the best place to read about that in a lot of detail is the Internet Master Plan, if you haven't had a chance to look at that, and that is available on our website.
Great. I see a question and I'm curious to learn more about this. So maybe I'll ask it. Why doesn't each government service have a publicly available Net Promoter Score? I know there are some Scandinavian governments doing this.
If you like that,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. So if you like that question, please check out the UK Government Digital Services, I want to say it's performance platform. So they have, I want to say, it's 777 services online. I believe that's the number only because it's such a random 777. So things like that. It's not the same as Net Promoter Score. They do cost per transaction, completion rate. I forget the other two. Anyhow, it's sort of the same concept of putting something like that on. You know, it's something that Net Promoter, I'll put aside Net Promoter Score because some people really don't like Net Promoter Score. It's something that we used in the Ontario Digital Service. We didn't put it publicly online, but we would ask that as a follow-up with some of our engagements. So yeah, I think it relates sort of to the culture change question, and also to the extent that some of the organizations consider themselves in that sort of more service provider-y, you know, it has a little bit of a corporate sense to it. If they sort of align with that thinking, then people tend to work in that way. Some of those things are already happening internally, but I think it's absolutely a great question. And I know the UK government's one, I believe it's not being fully maintained right now, and I'm not sure about the context there. I think maybe the resources were diverted to COVID response, but you can see how something like that can be a really interesting way to give people insights on how the service is working, and to hold government and services to account. So I don't think that fully answers your question, but hopefully it got somewhere there, and feel free to ask follow-ups.
Yeah, I just want to say, Katherine from the Beta NYC team, thank you very much for all the work that you're doing. It's amazing that you came on board in the middle of a pandemic, and just to see all the great work that you and your team are continuing to do.